So, as we see offensive operations wind down for both Russia and Ukraine due to heading into the winter months, we can somewhat look ahead to 2024. And this is not to say that there isn't going to still be fighting this winter, because there certainly is, and Ukraine has stated they will continue to take the fight to the Russians throughout the winter due to the superior capability of weapons provided to them by Western nations. Despite this fact, there is going to be a decrease in operations, but this war is far from over. In a revealing and rather grim assessment from within a Russian prison, Igor Girkin, who is an incarcerated Russian ultranationalist and former Russian officer, has conveyed a pretty critical prognosis for the Russian military's future capabilities in Ukraine. Now, before we get into that, who is Igor Girkin? Now, Girkin gained international notoriety for his involvement in the early stages of the war in eastern Ukraine in 2014, when he emerged as a key figure in the largely successful pro-Russian separatist movement in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine, as well as the annexation of Crimea. Girkin served as the Minister of Defense and Commander of the Armed Forces of the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic for a period of time, granting him unique access to the inner workings of the Russian military and the MOD. It was his previous criticisms of Russia's Ministry of Defense and the Kremlin for how poorly they were doing in Ukraine in these most recent effort is what got him arrested. So he was a part of the more successful operations, saw how to do things, watched the Russians kind of bumble through this, and has been critical enough that it got him arrested. Now, his comments offer a window into the ongoing military operations along the front line in Ukraine. According to Girkin, the situation for Russian forces in Ukraine is progressively worsening, and their robust defenses against Ukraine's recent offensives conceals an underlying fragility. He characterizes the Russian forces as increasingly weaker relative to their Ukrainian counterparts. Despite past successes in staving off Ukrainian advances, Girkin foresees that by the time of the spring of 2024, the Russian army will find itself even less equipped and less trained for offensive maneuvers than it currently is. Now, looking into the specifics of his comments, and it was Girkin who gave a note with all of this to his wife, and she shared it with across the board, because Igor Girkin actually is pretty highly respected still across Russia. He said that the planned broad Russian offensives that were supposed to take place at the onset of this previous fall, did not materialize because Russian troops were entangled in protracted skirmishes without achieving any significant operational objectives. He talks about areas such as Kupiansk, Lyman, Avdiivka. In Kupiansk, Russian forces didn't make any substantive progress and are now entrenched in clashes on the outskirts of the town with Ukrainian forces, and they're only a mere 24 miles from the Russian border with these struggles. While in Lyman, the Russians failed to shift the battlefield dynamics in their favor after losing significant ground. Girkin's insights are especially cutting when discussing Avdiivka, which has been kind of the focus recently. He cites disproportionate losses of Russian lives and equipment in Avdiivka without yielding further offensive momentum. In the last 3 weeks, the Russians lost 7,000 soldiers, 100 tanks, and 250 armored vehicles on this one battlefield. Girkin suggests this illustrates a Russian incapacity to dominate even a small fraction of the front line, regardless of the meticulous planning, coordination, and a plus-up of North Korean ammunition. Couple this with Russia's inability to defend some of its most expensive assets, specifically a successful attack on a Russian cruise missile carrier, the Askol, by the Ukrainians, where the damage was quite extensive. And again, Ukraine doesn't have a navy. And it all points to Russia struggling through this war, only being propped up by their larger population. Now, Girkin assessed that even without a major Ukrainian breakthrough during this last fall-winter season of the counteroffensive that we've seen, Russian forces will remain unable to launch broad offensives due to exhaustion and the attrition of combat power. He acknowledged the possibility that Ukrainian forces might succeed in regrouping and significantly breaking through the fatigued Russian front lines early next year. The Russians simply are just not rotating forces in and out. He noted the poor timing of Russian offensives near Avdiivka coinciding with adverse weather conditions that have historically impeded Russian military operations. They seem to be repeating their mistakes over and over again. And Girkin also pointed out that Western military assistance to Ukraine could shift the balance, especially if Ukraine were to receive F-16s, which could temporarily provide localized air superiority on small portions of the front line during major offensive pushes in that specific portion of the front line. Not necessarily the whole front line, but if they were to group them together to assist the ground forces. Girkin also commented on the manpower disparity, citing the lack of a Russian mobilization effort. And he's a staunch a proponent of Russian mobilization. He wants it to take place, but he admitted the inability of such action likely occurring before 2024 due to the presidential elections, and such a mobilization would be hugely unpopular. He suggested that Russia's military has depleted its pool of potential contract servicemen and volunteers and are now relying on forced conscription from the underbelly of Russian society, which contrasts with the Ukrainian forces, which he claims have a trained manpower advantage. Girkin and many experts on both sides of this fight are now realizing, despite holding against Ukraine for the past 5 months, despite Ukraine not gaining as much territory as they had wished, but having attrited a huge amount of Russian combat power with incredible losses that Russia sustained, means that the Russian conscript army is going to have a very, very difficult fight in 2024. Make no mistake, this war is not over, and the longer Russia has to fight it, the longer Russia has to be engaged in whether it's a stalemate situation on the front lines or offensive, counteroffensive operations, the more painful it's going to become for the Russian people at home.